Hey, good evening. It's time to start a new book. It's a continuation of the old book of 1 Samuel, but we're in 2 Samuel as we completed 1 Samuel last week. Uh, Originally in the Hebrew, there was only one book of Samuel, but the translators of the Septuagint, they decided to break it into two books, 1st and 2nd Samuel, we call it today. And basically the first one is the reign of Saul, and the second one is the reign of David. When we get to 2 Samuel, as we work our way through it, it's going to be following King David around. And could just as easily have been called the Book of David and been appropriate, I guess. But we closed 1 Samuel out with the death of King Saul and his son Jonathan, his other sons too. And remember, Saul and his armor bearer, according to the last chapter, was it 31 of 1 Samuel, they fell on their swords and apparently committed double suicide. Saul and his armor bearer did. But as we begin 2 Samuel, somebody shows up from that defeated Israeli camp and has a different twist on the story here. And we get a little more detail, and probably it looks to me like this Amalekite that came from there is making some stuff up, that he's lying because he's wanting a reward. But he turns out that's not the reward that he was hoping for. So let's pick up here 2 Samuel 1, where David learns of Saul's death. Remember, David had gone to fight with the Philistines, and it was if not for the providence of God, it was a time that finally it looked like King David and his followers, his 600 soldiers down there, were going to end up actually having to fight against Israel, and that couldn't happen. David had been perfectly fine to dwell down with the Philistines and fight against the common enemies of Israel that the Philistines had. And of course, he was putting on a show for the kings and the Philistine king to make him think that he didn't like Israel either. So he almost ended up getting in a bad situation there, but he would have. But other than the providence of God, I think the other Philistines said, hey, we're not going into battle with him against Israel. He's liable to turn on us. So they sent David and his army back to Ziklag, where they lived. But when they got back to Ziklag, somebody had come in, the Amalekites, I think, and stolen all their women and their children and their stuff. So David and his men, they'd been traveling long distance. They took right out, and they caught them, and they whipped them, and they took their stuff back. So they don't know, they don't have any news yet about what happened in that other battle that they were almost in, way up there between the Philistines and Israel, but they're about to find out. So verse 1 of chapter 1, now it came to pass after the death of Saul that we read about in the last chapter, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, that David abode 2 days in Ziklag. He got back home. He lived at home there in Ziklag, the Philistine city, when he was there. And now news is about to show up in town. It came even to pass on the third day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul, where the battle had been. And this man, he had his clothes rent, and earth upon his head is a sign of mourning. Now, this guy was probably pretending, I think, to please David. And so it was, when he came to David, that he fell to the earth, and he did obeisance to David. And David said unto him, from whence comest thou? Where'd you come from? And he said, out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said to him, how went the matter? How'd that battle go? How went the matter, I pray thee? Tell me. And he answered, that the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. Remember, Jonathan was the best friend that David had. And David said to the young man that told him, how do you know this? How knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? And the young man who'd come from the battle that told him said, as I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, I was just going by, and behold, there was Saul leaned upon his spear. Now, I guess you could read this like he was about to commit suicide, or maybe he did lean upon his spear, but it didn't do the job, you know what I mean? And lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me. And he called me, and I said, here I am. And he said to me, who art thou? And I answered him, said, I'm an Amalekite. He said to me again, Stand, I pray thee, upon me, and slay me, kill me, for anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet, I'm not dead yet. Go ahead and put me out of my misery before they get here and torture me. The Amalekite man said, So I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head, and the bracelet that was upon his arm. He brought that as evidence to David, I guess. And I brought him hither to my Lord. Then David took hold on his clothes, and he rent them likewise with all the men that were with him, because, see, Israel's king has died now. Remember, David he had the opportunity. Saul was crazy, but David recognized him. Hey, this is the man that's in the office. That's who God's put in here. And David would never kill him. He had a chance, cut his shirt tail off and left his spear beside his head and all this, but he thought, I can't touch the Lord's anointed. And they mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son. Now that's who David's heart really broke for, I guess, and for the people of the Lord, because they'd all been whipped in battle, and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. And David said to the young man that told him, Whence art thou? Where'd you come from? And he answered, said, I'm the son of a stranger, an Amalekite. And David said to him, How wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? You weren't even afraid to kill him? And David called one of the young men and said, one of his soldiers over. David said, You go over and kill him. Go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. See, I think the Amalekite made a lot of this up, and he just took the crown and stuff, and he thought that David was really the enemy of Israel, but he wasn't, because he'd been down there with the Philistines, and you knew that King Saul had animosity toward David. So I think he was an opportunist that took this crown and bracelet off the dead king and thought, I'll take it and give it to David, and he'll reward me somehow. But David said, No, you killed the Lord's anointed. We're going to kill you. So David said to him, Your blood be upon your head, for your mouth has testified against thee. Your own mouth condemned thee. You've admitted to doing this, saying, I've slain the Lord's anointed. So verse 17 is introduction to verse 19 in the remainder of the chapter, which is a lamentation that David wrote for King Saul, a funeral dirge, if you would. So verse 17 says, David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. In parentheses, verse 18 says, Also he being Saul here, he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. It was under King Saul's reign that Israel learned how to use advanced weaponry of bow and arrows at that time. And there's a note at the bottom of verse 18 says, Behold, it's written in the book of Jasher. And if I told you to look in your Bible for the book of Jasher, you could look all day and you couldn't find it because it ain't in the Bible. But it don't mean it's a lost book of the Bible. Some people will run to that in a hurry. There's no lost books. God made sure he gave us what he wanted us to have. The Old Testament 39 and the 27 of the New is what God wanted us to have. There were other books, though, just as there are other books today. They just weren't the inspired Word of God. And the book of Jasher was a record of some of these things that existed in this day, 1000 BC or so. It's written; those things are written in the book of Jasher. Verse 19 begins the lamentation that David wrote. And it's a beautiful, poetic funeral hymn for Saul and Jonathan. It says, The beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. How are the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath. Don't tell them Philistines. Publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, another Philistine city. Lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Ye mountains of Gilboa, that's where Saul died. Let there be no dew, let there be no rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away, the shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. They did their part in the battle. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death They were not divided. They died together. They were swifter than eagles and stronger than lions. They were great warriors. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet. Things have been good under his reign for the nation. Who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in the high places. You was killed on that mountain too. And David said, in his lamentation song, he said, I'm distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. You were closer than anybody I've ever had, Jonathan. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished. So, we'll pick up chapter 2 next week, and this is where David is finally the fulfillment of he becomes king.